In this video tutorial, we will look at the musculoskeletal and nervous systems. The musculoskeletal system is comprised of all the bones in your body and the muscles that make them move. That's why it's called musculoskeletal, muscles, skeleton. Skeletal tissues include bones, ligaments, and cartilage. The skeleton is a framework of bones that supports and protects your internal organs. Hard and dense, they consist of bone cells within a matrix of minerals such as calcium and phosphorus, and also collagen fibers. Canals within these bones contain nerves and blood vessels. Only a small percentage of bone tissue is actually living though. Ligaments are tough and elastic material, and these long fibers of collagen hold bones together at the joints. While cartilage is a dense matrix of collagen fibers, these provide a strong, flexible, low-friction support for our bones and other tissue. You'll typically find cartilage in your ear, nose, esophagus, and joints. So once again, ligaments hold the different bones together, while the cartilage prevents them from grinding up against each other. As we grow old, this cartilage is no longer as flexible or strong as it once was. As such, when the bones grind up against each other, we feel joint pains. Now when it comes to muscles, there are three major types: involuntary, voluntary, and cardiac. Involuntary muscles are also known as smooth muscles. That's because under a microscope, they don't have these striation lines as you see with cardiac and skeletal muscles. The reason why they're called involuntary muscles is because they are controlled unconsciously. So for instance, the muscles of your intestinal tract are involuntary. You don't have to think about moving the food in your guts in order for the motion of peristalsis to work. On the other hand, voluntary muscles are those that can be controlled consciously. So you can actively think about controlling these muscles. Voluntary muscles are also known as skeletal muscles because their role is typically to move bones. Although we can move these muscles consciously, they can also be unconsciously moved in the form of reflexes. So if, for instance, I touch a hot object, I immediately shrink back without actually thinking about moving my hand away. That's called a reflex. Finally, cardiac muscles, also known as myocardium, are those that are found in the heart. Heart muscles tend to be different from the other ones because they only have one nucleus, while a lot of skeletal muscles tend to have multiple nuclei. Furthermore, your heart muscles have to work 24 hours a day in order to keep you alive, and they only rest in between the heartbeats. So they have to be designed differently than the muscles in your arms and legs, for instance. Now, muscle tissue is made of muscle fibers that contain a specialized protein. This protein allows the muscles to contract or shrink when signaled by nerve cells. When they contract, when they shrink, the muscles will get shorter and thicker. So if I wanted to bend my arm and move it up, an electrical signal from my brain tells these muscles to contract, to shrink, and as they shrink, they pull my arm up. And as you can see, the tendons connect the muscle to the bone. Some bones contain marrow. Marrow is where red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are created. People with leukemia have a cancer in their marrow, and so they're unable to create these cells properly, which of course affects their immune system. Certain types of leukemia can be cured by removing this bone marrow that's cancerous and replacing it with healthy stem cells from a donor that will then be used to regrow the bone marrow. So once again, please join the One Match network. Because muscles cannot push, they can only shrink, skeletal muscles must always work in opposing pairs or groups. So if I want to pull my arms up, my biceps will shrink and contract while the triceps will relax and extend. The opposite is true if I want to push my arm down. The biceps will relax while the triceps will shrink and contract together. So remember, muscles can't push, they can only shrink. As such, skeletal muscles work as partners, they work in pairs in order to give us the push and pull motions that we use. Osteoporosis is a disease that can affect everyone, but most commonly they affect older women. After menopause, they no longer produce as much estrogen or progesterone hormones, and this can lead to a loss of bone tissue, making the bones weaker, and they no longer carry as much calcium as they once did. Back in the 90s, scientists tried to inject estrogen and progesterone, hoping to bring their levels back up in order to reverse the damage of osteoporosis. And though it did help, it also had the side effect of increasing the rates of breast cancer, uterus cancer, and heart attacks. So although hormone replacement therapy is still used to help treat osteoporosis, doctors have to make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. Since osteoporosis doesn't cause any pain, at least not until you break your bones, only a bone density test can indicate the presence of this disorder. To reduce the onset and development of osteoporosis, people are encouraged to eat food or supplements that contain calcium and vitamin D, as these two will improve bone health. Meanwhile, physical exercise can also help in increasing bone mass and reducing the risks of osteoporosis. The nervous system senses the environment and coordinates appropriate responses. It's made up of two major parts, the central nervous system, CNS, which includes the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. The central nervous system is shielded by bones to protect it from physical damage. While the skull protects the brain, the spine protects the spinal cord. People who damage their spinal cord are no longer able to send messages from their brain to different parts of their body. Depending on how high up the spinal cord damage is, we lose control of the organs connected below the damaged point. In the peripheral nervous system, nerves carry signals between the central nervous system and the body. The peripheral nervous system then relays information about the internal and external environments to the brain, and once a decision has been made, the peripheral nervous system can relay instructions from the brain back to the other parts of the body, controlling the bodily functions and its responses. So the central nervous system is responsible for all the decision making, while the job of the peripheral nervous system is to receive information and transmit information, thereby allowing the central nervous system to control the rest of the body. The peripheral nervous system can be further divided into three groups of nerves: those that control voluntary muscles, those that carry information from sensory organs to the brain, so for instance from the eyes, ears, and tongue over to the brain, and finally those that regulate involuntary functions such as breathing, heartbeats, and digestion. There are two major sections to a nerve cell. The first part is the cell body. Here we see dendrites extending out and branching out from the main cell body. This allows the cell to send signals to multiple areas and also receive signals from multiple areas. These signals then travel along this tail called an axon, which can connect onto another nerve cell or directly to the tissue being controlled. Now the axon is covered by a fatty material called myelin. This has the same function as the insulation on electrical wiring, maintaining signal quality and preventing miscommunication. In people with multiple sclerosis, the immune system malfunctions and begins attacking the myelin sheath. Without this insulation, the signal quality is reduced and they can no longer control their bodies as they once could. Sensory receptors are special cells that receive input from the external environment. So the eyes contain receptors that are sensitive to light, while the nose contains receptors sensitive to odors. This information is then sent along the peripheral nervous system back towards the brain. Sensory receptors are also found in the muscles and skin, and they are sensitive to pressure, temperature, and pain. Together, these receptors make us aware of our balance, position, and motion. As was mentioned previously, reflexes are involuntary actions that do not require the involvement of the brain, so no conscious thought is involved. The spinal cord acts as a shortcut for reflexes, providing immediate response to dangerous stimuli. So if you touch a hot object, the signal is sent along the nerves towards the spinal cord, but instead of going to the brain where you can decide whether you want to move your hand away or not, it kind of short circuits it and comes back telling the arm to move away from the heat. This saves time because instead of having to decide what to do next, the spinal cord tells the muscles to immediately move away from the danger, thus reducing or minimizing the injury you would have received had you left it there a little longer.